Well, good afternoon. I hope everybody had a good lunch. As just been said, my name is Bert Meerman, and I'm from the GoFair Foundation. And it's actually my pleasure to say a few words about the GoFair Foundation, but mainly to say something about the fair evaluation process, and also about the recommendations that we have defined in order to monitor improvement of the fairness of datasets over time. As we have all seen from Eric's slides earlier this morning, GoFair is in my mind a very interesting movement that will have an impact in terms of the way we will exchange data with each other, and also in terms of the way we will visit data more than really exchanging data in the years to come. Not only in the scientific world, not only in the medical world, but also in other domains. That is what we expect. And some of you may have heard the statement of Ursula von der Leyen. She is the president of the European Commission at this moment. And recently, she actually said that more than 80% of the publicly financed scientific data sets are never reused. Let me repeat that. More than 80% of the publicly financed scientific data sets are never, ever reused. So on the one hand, of course, that makes us feel, not so efficient. But on the other hand, I think for us, that's a fantastic opportunity also. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for all of us to bring that let's say, share back from 80% to maybe 10% or 20%, simply by making the data fair. A few words about the GoFair Foundation. We were founded 2 years ago. We are a foundation, neutral entity, non-profit organization, of course. And in first instance, we were actually set up as a legal entity for the GoFair initiative. Everything that Eric talked about earlier this morning. Very soon, the foundation was asked to participate in European projects, EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud, mainly around the formation and setting up the secretariat functions of the EOSC, and later on also to take a number of tasks in EOSC-Nordic. That's the project where we are in right now. Also, what is interesting in that in Holland, we were asked by the Ministry of Economic Affairs to investigate, to develop an evaluation and a certification program for fair data and services. We feel that is very interesting because the certification of data sets, metadata sets, fair data points, later on pre-validated algorithms that visit data sets can make a huge difference by increasing the trust factor of the researchers and the research institutions. We feel that the trust factor is sometimes an inhibitor, and that factor can be increased if there are certification programs, let's say, behind what we're doing at this moment. Next to the two EU projects and the project of the Dutch ministry, we are recently heavily involved in an existing project called VODAN. Eric already said something about it. It's basically a project to fight the virus outbreak by structuring the patient data in such a way that you can have smart queries, smart algorithms that can visit the data, who is typically very privacy sensitive. And this way the virus-related data can actually stay in the country. I was on a call yesterday with Eric, with a number of African countries, and we were told the story that the virus data on the Ebola outbreak a few years ago, that data is no longer in Africa. it's been taken. It's almost been stolen by private companies who thought that they could use this data for their own purposes. And at this moment, there is no data anymore in Africa about the Ebola outbreak that they had a few years ago. So for us, it is absolutely vital that data stays in the country and that researchers can concentrate on machine actionable patient data. Okay, I see now a message coming up. The co-host asked you to start your video. That's, let me see, let's get that to work. No. I'm fine. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
No problem, Bert. No problem, Bert. Just go ahead. I was just
okay.
That
is good. I was under the impression that maybe something went wrong, but that is okay.
So that would just be nice to see your face also. That's all. That's fine.
Yeah, I will do that. I will do that later, because then probably I have to stop sharing. I'll do that in a few minutes. So it's important that the virus data stays in the country, and that researchers can actually concentrate on machine actionable patient data, leading hopefully to faster discovery of the correlations of different dependencies that we haven't thought of yet. So that there can be, let's say, faster development of vaccines and medicines. Let me see if I can skip to the, yeah. So this is the website. This is the website of the GoFair Foundation. Don't check it right now, but maybe at a later stage you may want to take a look at this COVID-19 outbreak project. Then let's concentrate on the task that we have here in the EOSC-Nordic project, which is basically the evaluation of the fairness of data sets and how to improve this over time. This is the starting point. These are the FAIR principles. Eric already mentioned them. So everything starts here with, let's say, these 15 principles that we have defined several years ago. Now, how do you get from principles to scores? The process is as follows. We start with the principles, and what we did, basically, we did an exercise to start measuring these principles, mainly by defining fair maturity indicators. And we did that with a lot of help from many people, mainly in the RDA Maturity Indicator Working Group. And I'm sure that some of you were also at that last meeting. I think it was in Helsinki in October or in November. And this working group was very helpful in terms of making the translation from principles to these fair maturity indicators. We then asked Mark Wilkinson and his team to translate this into an evaluator software. It was designed, it was scripted by Mark. Mark is a Spanish professor at the Technical University in Madrid, and he was one of the original writers also on the articles in 2016. He is a very strong player in our network. And this test, as Andreas also said, is basically the test that we've used for Nordic Fair. It's 22 tests to monitor the fairness of data sets on the basis of machine actionable metadata, and by simply offering the software, the URI or the DOI of the data set. Just a word of caution. this evaluator is we all feel is a very nice piece of work. It's a great job, but as you will see, and as Andrea also mentioned, it is not yet perfect. It's not complete. Cannot yet test everything. It cannot test all the sub-principles. For instance, R1.2 about the provenance of the metadata. It cannot really test that at the moment. And also it cannot test R1.3, which is about the domain relevant community standards of the metadata. So it's not perfect, but I think it's a very good first step into the process. So what is the plan? And on this slide, it basically shows what we have done and what we plan. It's a simple process to monitor the evolution of fairness of these data sets. So what we did, we defined which repositories and which samples are to be evaluated. Based upon Mark Wilkinson's evaluator, we ran the evaluator and noted the scores. And in addition, we have made a document with recommendations and with recommended actions if you fail a certain test. Now, if you consistently follow up these recommendations, then over time you will see that the data sets will be improved in terms of the fairness. And the idea is, of course, in 3, 6, 9, 12 months time, we will measure again, write a report about it, showing hopefully a positive trend. So that is the plan. Let me show you. Let me see if I can show you the. I thought I could show you the document. No, I can probably not. Let me move on. In the documentation that some of you have had, and if you have not seen it, then you can download it also from the agenda. You will see that there's a document which actually explains in very much detail, let's say, what the tests do, what your first recommendation is if you fail a certain test, and it gives also even more info in terms of what was exactly tested and which are the elements that you have to tweak in your data sets to actually pass that test. This refers also to one of the questions that was made by Koenraad. And there's a very detailed reasoning behind failing a test or passing a test. As this document is probably a little bit small to use as a write-up, what I've done is I've just taken a few examples in terms of these tests and in terms of let's say the different recommendations that we have. So if you look at the recommendation document, you see that there's a test number from 1 to 22. There are 6 columns. There's a test header explaining what the test really does. It gives an indication against which principle or sub-principle that this is tested, with the asterisks that 1.2 and 1.3 are not really tested against at this moment. There's a description of the test, clearly indicating how the test works. There's a recommendation upon failure. So what's your first step that you need to do? And then there's more detailed info if you want to be very specific, if you want to know exactly, why this test failed. So as an example here, for instance, test number 1 is the question about the unique identifier of the metadata. So one has to assure that metadata has a unique identifier. Otherwise, you're not findable. It doesn't work. But this test is against principle F1. And of course, what it does, it actually looks then for this unique identifier, and if it cannot find it, the test will fail. Recommendation here is then to provide the metadata using unique identifiers, such as an DOI or fair sharing. DOI, most of you will know what it is. That is a digital object identifier to permanently identify a document or an article, and it's easy to link to. And for people who have no experience with fair sharing, that is a UK company who registers metadata standards, metadata templates. So it's a useful mechanism to actually register what you have been doing. Then if you go to the detailed info on the test, you see that one of the recommendations is that you absolutely have to have a GUID, a global unique identifier that resolves to landing page, hopefully, ideally, of course, with a separation between the metadata and the data. So this is how the document works, and most of you have received this document. And what you can do is that if you fail a certain test, you can first look into the recommendations. And if you have an issue, you can always find experts, either through me or to Andreas, to help you further in this process. Another example is test number 2. That is about how persistent is your metadata. So you have to assure that the metadata has a persistent identifier, and also here in this case, the service of fair sharing can actually help. And you can see that in the detailed infos, there's also some reference to the exact schemas that are tested, like Perl, W3ID, ARC, etc., etc. Another example, I have just taken a few of the 22 tests, is test number 9, which is basically to assure that you have a proper resolution protocol so that the data can be resolved. And it gives some indication in terms of, let's say, keys that can be used, INCHI keys, DOIs, handles, and or URLs. Test number 13, as an example, has the metadata an explicitly identified persistent policy. Also, of course, very, very important in terms of the accessibility. And also here, it is tested if the metadata contains this explicitly identified policy. If you fail this test, then the recommendation is to create a link to such a policy, and of course, ideally in machine actionable format, because we are, as was discussed earlier this morning, we are really talking about machine actionable metadata. Last example is basically about the question, does your metadata include, or does it point to a license? It's the only test that we have at this moment within the R of the word fair, and what we've seen is that at least some of the repositories have built that in. If it's not, then make sure at least that your metadata is let's say is findable with a key license that has a resource at its value, and then you will pass this test. Of course, it is not only about passing the test. But it is important that over time that you increase the fairness of your data sets. So these were a number of examples in terms of how to interpret the test and how to get more information about how the test is actually working. I trust this was helpful and useful. And if there are questions, we can do it right now, but you can also always send me a mail at a later stage.